We're going to move right into our next speaker, and he is Godfrey Plata. And again, we're going to play his speaker video first, and then we'll come back for Q&A. I do see Godfrey in the participants list. Godfrey, are you there? Can you hear us?
I am. Hello. Can you hear me?
Okay, great. Godfrey, I will pin you when we get to the Q&A. But oh, there you go. Hey, Godfrey, how's it going?
Hey, good. Thank you.
Awesome. So I'm going to play Godfrey's video first. So everybody, please stand by and check out your screen.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Godfrey Santos Plata, and like JD said, I have been proud to be supporting public education for the last 13 years, my entire career. But as an immigrant, any immigrants in the house out there? Woo! As an immigrant, one of the first rules that my parents ever taught me was that you don't break the rules. We came here to the United States from the Philippines, being stabbed 37 times for vocalizing his political beliefs. And so when we came to the United States, they were like, no, you don't talk about what you believe like that. You keep your head down, you keep working, just don't shake up the boat. What was interesting was when I started my public education in LAUSD, Los Angeles Unified School District, I went to a school that was predominantly Black, and we studied a lot of US history about folks rocking the boat. It was called the Civil Rights Movement, slavery resistance. And so I was getting different messages about how to engage with rules here in the United States. And what I realized, though, as I was growing up, was every time we situated breaking the rules, it happened in history. And what that did was it created a narrative that racism, classism, xenophobia, they were all things in the past. And so I kept believing what my parents said. I kept believing, okay, well, let me just continue following the rules. And eventually, where I began to see the rules have a different impact on my life was when I went to college. I went to school at the University of Richmond in Virginia. It's a private university, 80% white, predominantly affluent. There's a lake in the middle of the campus that separated men and women, and we lived on opposite sides of the lake. Very different from Los Angeles. And it was there that I began to realize that different rules were applied to my education from the education of my peers who were white and affluent. And so one of those first times was my very first week of college. All during high school, I went to a great high school. I took the advanced placement AP English class. We worked all year long to write an excellent 2-page paper. And once I got to college that first week, I realized that our assignment was to write an excellent 6-page paper, one that my white and affluent peers were already prepared to write. When I was in high school here in Los Angeles, one thing we loved doing was singing, dancing. We loved the arts. And I realized that when I got to college, my peers who were white and affluent actually learned how to read music, and they had traveled through Europe, traveling with their orchestras and choirs already. And then when I was here in Los Angeles through the public education system, we did plays, and because we were communities of color, we were all cast as a result of our talent and merit. And then when I got to college, I realized that if plays were written by white people for white people, that they cast white people in them, and there was no place for us to go. It was clear that the different educations we had gotten had literally created different opportunities for us in life. And so I started to dedicate my life to beginning to change those rules through public education, working with our youngest students. So here's a picture of me teaching 5th grade, and I think this is in 2006. Now, one thing I didn't count on was now that I was a teacher trying to change the rules through the next generation, I actually needed to be the enforcer of rules at that certain point. And the big shocking awakening of all of this happened in my first week as a 7th grade teacher at a middle school. I had a class of 49 students, only 35 chairs in that first week. So I had students sitting on the floor, on the windowsill, had to figure out how to fix that problem. Once everyone had a seat, I had a student, a 12-year-old Latina girl, who was warned to me would be mischievous. During one class, she got up out of her seat in the back of the classroom. This is in the middle of class. She walked up to me, to the front of the classroom. She handed me a note. I opened the note. It said, "F you, Mr. Plata" on it. Didn't say F. She ran outside the classroom. I followed her out there. I looked through the door. She was gone in the hallway. I'm a new teacher. I was just like, I don't know what to do. Do I like write your name on the board and tally that? I don't know. I call my assistant principal, and I will never forget what my assistant principal's guidance was. My assistant principal's guidance was, do you want to press charges against her? I was a first-year teacher being asked whether or not I should be pressing charges on a 12-year-old girl I just met. And this was my introduction to what it meant to be in public education. And we weren't just being asked to enforce rules like that on just my student, on just one student. That was something that was systemic inside an entire district. When I was teaching in Texas, when students were overly suspended, we were told that the next step in their consequences was to send them to the local alternative school. And it turns out, I found out 9 years after I started teaching, that the local alternative school was actually housed in a building built by the Corrections Corps of America, literally built by the same people who build private prisons. It was a student-teacher ratio of 87-1. Teachers did not have to be certified to teach there, and we were paying $11.9 million of taxpayer money to be able to send our students there. None of us knew this. We were just told as teachers, these are the rules. And I found out way too late in my career. This was 9 years after I started teaching, and as soon as I discovered that fact, I couldn't undiscover it. So we started organizing. We started bringing together students, families, parents, teachers into apartments, into school cafeterias to talk about the stories of their experiences at this alternative school facility. And eventually, these conversations rallied hundreds of people together, and we brought our concerns to the district administration, and we were able to shut the school down. I began to realize that even though there were rules of the game that we were asked to follow, not all of the rules were actually going to work in our favor as communities of color. And so I started obsessing over organizing around educational inequity issues. But what I also began to realize was that when we started organizing around the school to prison pipeline, when we started to organize against educational inequity, the term that we would use was Black and brown. And when we say Black and brown, which is a true fact that there are disproportionate impacts of the school to prison pipeline on Black and brown folks, we don't think about Asian folks. And that perpetuates the model minority myth. Erasure of our communities happens when we don't consider ourselves folks who also deal with white supremacy and inequity. And that's a disservice to our communities and our students. And I also began to realize that was a disservice to our teachers. So when I got back to Los Angeles and moved back home, I began to organize Southern Californian, Asian American, Native Hawaiian, Pacific Islander teachers. And together we have begun to meet in our own apartments, in our own homes, in our own schools here in Southern California, to be able to battle the myth that Asian folks are not people you think about when you think about educational inequity. We are. And so through this organizing here in Southern California now, what we've been able to do is lift up where ethnic studies actually continues to perpetuate stories of the model minority myth about Asian folks. We've been able to lift up the fact that when we don't disaggregate our data about how different Asian folks experience Asianness differently, we do a disservice to our students who actually do come to this country with new needs and different needs from maybe Asian folks who have been here for generations. This is important. And so while I came to the country being told by my immigrant parents, follow the rules, I think my following the rules has now earned me the privilege to be able to say, actually, the rules don't work in our favor. And it's time to change the rules, not just in education, but in all ways of life. And so 2 months ago, I took the step to file for office here in the state of California and run for a California State Assembly. Because in our California State Assembly, there are 80 people making laws for everyone in the United States. And only 3 of them are immigrants. Only 4 of them are LGBTQ folks. And I aim to become the first person in California history to be both immigrant and gay, to change the rules of who gets to make the rules to begin with. Thank you.
All right.
Good afternoon.
Oh, give me 1 second, everyone. Stop share. And okay, everyone, let's give some snaps and a round of applause for Godfrey.
Canada of Europe.
Oh,
and unlike most countries in the world, Sweden.
Godfrey, every time I watch that video, I kind of get some goosebumps. In an amazing video. How are you, sir?
I am good. Thank you for inviting me on. I have a big heart for Houston. As I mentioned, I used to live and work in Houston for quite some time in my life. So, quote Beyonce, I love you, Houston. Also, apologies about the facial hair and like that. My look today. The pandemic has kept me away from looking well for everyone, but I am well.
Yeah, because I used to have facial hair and used to be clean cut, and then now we've changed.
We're just gonna see what happens. Yeah.
Well, tell us in a few quick minutes about yourself and how everything's going, and then if you have a question, please put it in chat, and we'll have Godfrey answer them.
Yeah, sure. I said a lot about myself in the video. I am from the Philippines. That's really important to me that people know that I'm an immigrant because immigrants get a bad rap in the United States all too well. I know Houston knows a lot about that really well because Houston is the most diverse city in the United States per capita, and most folks don't know that elsewhere in the United States. I taught 7th grade in Houston. As I mentioned, for those of you who know Houston really well, I used to teach in Southeast Houston over by Hobby Airport. Actually, if you want to place where I was working. Right now, I'm still running for office, but I'm doing that on top of a full-time job, on top of taking care of myself in the midst of this pandemic. My full-time job is I get to work with teachers all over the nation to help them understand how to take their experiences with their students and turn that into organizing advocacy work to influence policy, because too many people who make laws around education have no idea what happens in schools. And we're trying to change that. And so doing lots of things from inside my apartment these days, but otherwise doing well. I see some questions in the chat box.
Yeah, let's get to it. Convend is asking, how can we as students combat the system? How can you help? Yeah, great question.
I think that's from Aaron, Olivia, and then Kavandre had a different question. But how can we as students combat that system? How can we help? I mean, the first thing that people, I think, have to realize if they're going to feel like they can combat a system is to realize how powerful they are. There's lots of messages out there that tell us that because of the color of their skin, because of our age, because of our income, because of where we live, because of our gender, our sexual orientation, we are told all the time that we are less than. Literally, if you take a look right now, for example, even at how the government has given certain stipends or whatnot for folks to make it through the pandemic, not everyone actually gets that stipend depending on their citizenship status, for example. And as an immigrant, it's incredibly important for us to recognize when the government tells us that we are worth it or literally not worth it at all. And as students, I think we begin to internalize some of that. And so the first thing to do is to realize that you are powerful, and you're also more powerful collectively together than you are apart. One way I think about that, for example, is as a teacher, maybe I could walk into my principal's office and maybe there's like a field trip or something that I needed extra money for. And maybe I knew that there was some money in the budget set aside to help me do that project. I could walk as one teacher into a principal's office and maybe ask for that money. But I probably couldn't walk into that same principal's office and say, actually, we should stop suspensions completely for our entire school. Like, one teacher is probably not going to be that powerful. And so organizing is about realizing actually you're more powerful if you build more and more relationships with more people. Because if 100 people at the school started to say that like the system of suspensions was wrong, then that creates more of a case for the principal to actually begin to listen. And I think that same thing is true for students. Like I've seen students organize walkouts in Houston, for example, when a student was sent to ICE detention. For example, like 300 students walked out of Austin High School a couple of years ago in order to protest that. And eventually he was actually put on the path to asylum instead of being deported because of the power of students.
That's fantastic. Yeah. Okay, well, let's get to Kavandre's question. Sorry about that earlier. What was it like being at a predominantly white school?
Yeah. At the time, it kind of just like reminded me of being on TV. There was this show when I was younger called Dawson's Creek. Not sure if any of you all know anything about it. But it's a show that takes place. It's a show that takes place in the South, and there's like a lake, and like everyone is white on the show. So it just kind of like reminded me of, oh, okay, like this is what America is like. It's on TV. But like what I think over time, what it helped me to realize was how different our views of the world were because of the way in which we experience the world. I noticed, for example, that there was a person, a white person at my school, for example, who had never met a Filipino person before, and I'm Filipino. And she said, like, oh, I knew a Filipino person once. And even that mindset of like, I know she didn't mean anything poor by that, but it also made me wonder like how much me being Filipino meant I was now representing every Filipino person she would ever know. There was like this burden of representation that I felt like I was carrying. And because I grew up around a lot of Black and brown folks here in Los Angeles, I think I also felt the responsibility to ensure that when I was with a lot of white folks, that I was just representing like people of color in general. That's really uncomfortable, but it's also a responsibility that I felt at the end of the day, because when people don't grow up around us, they don't know any better. They don't know what struggles people go through. They don't know that different laws treat us differently. They don't know that we have fewer opportunities to get engaged civically or in the arts, because there are so many spaces that for a long time have been cultivated just by white folks. And we have to be the ones to break that barrier.
Yep, that's right. Okay, Angela Alvarez, are there any major obstacles you have faced before getting to where you are now?
I mean, I've had to think a lot. I mentioned that I'm gay. And I think it has been, when you're gay, people tell you like, oh, okay, like what's your coming out story? Like they ask about that. But what people don't know is that you're coming out for the rest of your life. There was like when I came out to my friends, when I came out to myself, then when I came out to my friends, then when I came out to my family, then every audience I'm ever in, and now I'm running for office. It's like, at what point does my being gay have to be a part of the conversation? I think is a question that I often overcome. And even in the Asian community in particular, there are folks in the Asian community who are friendlier to all sorts of different sexualities and who are not friendly to it at all. And I grew up Catholic, for example, and so even thinking about how you navigate that particular part of your identity, even within the Asian space, within the Catholic space, is always something in the back of my mind.
Sure. Okay, we have time for just a couple more questions. Grace Perez asks, how has teaching impacted your life, Godfrey?
Yeah, it's changed my life completely. I was going to become a director for theater, actually. My path was going to be a theater for social change work. I really believe in the arts, just like the conversation that was had right before this. I believe that the arts can shift culture. And so I believe that when we see ourselves on stage or TV or on screen, the stories that we tell matter. And a lot of times our stories actually are being told by other people. I think back to the Disney animated film Mulan, for example, and there are like not Asian people voicing so many of the characters in Mulan. And so I was going to go into directing work to be able to tell our stories. But once I got into the classroom, I think there was something that was very palpable and important to me about ensuring that every generation that we graduate into this world has the opportunity to be critical thinkers so that they can own this world rather than being owned themselves. And that is something that the arts can do and help to reinforce, but because so many of us enter the world through school, it was really important for me to make sure that youth were thinking of that way.
That's awesome. Okay, one last question from Van. How do Asian Americans in their everyday lives break the model minority myth in simple, minor ways?
Yeah, be yourself. That is like truly like my number one like tip for breaking the model minority myth. The model minority myth is a pressure to be in a particular container and to check off the boxes of this stereotype of what it means to be Asian. And if you actually authentically fulfill some of those stereotypes, if you know, the stereotypes out there like play piano, do math and science, like there are stereotypes out there. If you do those things, awesome. But if you don't do those things, be you, do you, right? Like I am in the arts. I'm out here running for office as an LGBTQ candidate. I entered the teaching profession right now nationally. I think the percentage is like only 1 to 1.5% of teachers nationally are Asian, and that's not going to represent the growing Asian population in the country. So do you, and that is the number one way to break the model minority myth. I'd also say that the model minority myth was created as a wedge between Asian folks and other communities of color. So step up to step up to actually represent Black folks in solidarity when they are being attacked, Latinx and Latino folks when they are being attacked, like step up to actually ensure that the world knows that Asian people also care about Black and brown folks. And some of us are also Black and brown because it's possible to be multiracial as well. Like step up, and that is a way to break the model minority myth.
Awesome. Everyone, well, before we leave, Godfrey, tell everyone how they can follow you and what you.
Oh, sure. Yeah, I'm gonna steal. I'm gonna steal what the presenter before me did. I was like, oh, good, she copied and pasted some stuff. I'm gonna copy and paste some stuff into the chat box there. But you can follow us at godfreyforassembly.com. We've got an Instagram, a Facebook, a Twitter. A lot of it is very like Los Angeles, California based, but I think what Texas folks will notice is that a lot of Texans and Californians face a lot of the same issues. So I hope that these are spaces for learning just like a classroom, but online.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Godfrey. Thank you so much.
Yeah.
I wanted to say a special thank you to Godfrey, and actually started teaching in Houston around the same time. And I've been following your work for quite a while and I'm so impressed with all that you're doing. So thank you for taking time to
thank you.
Your Houston roots here. Thank you.
Yeah, for sure.